Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Community Development Block Grant 2021 Certification Training, Webinar 1. Today, we will be focusing on the national objectives, fundability, and eligible activities. Presenters we have today include myself, Rebecca Shademan, and Steve Charleston, the CDBG Program Manager. In addition, Amber Ward will be moderating all of the questions that come in and any items that we need to further clarify in the Q&A chat. We have structured this event to have all attendees muted upon entry, and you are unable to mute yourself. So if you do have questions, please put those in the Q&A chat, and we'll address those throughout the presentation and also take moments. If there is a moment in time where maybe we're not understanding your questions, we do have the ability to unmute you to then vocalize your question out to the group. We are recording this training for attendees that were not able to attend today, but wish to view the recording. So with that, we'll begin. So in addition, we'll talk about the CDBG history, the Nebraska CDBG program, eligible recipients of CDBG funds, national objectives, eligible and ineligible activities, and key resources. Yesterday, Amber Ward sent out an email with resources available for this week's training. Those are all accessible from our ShareFile account. In case you have not gone on there, I wanted to show everyone how you can access those documents. If you click on the link that was in her email, you'll be brought to this web page. You will complete these fields on the screen, and then you can select all and download each of the folders here. So, and they should go to your desktop. Within those folders for today's presentations, we have copies of the slide PowerPoints, and then also handouts that we'll be referring to throughout the presentation. And so I will turn it over to Steve Charleston.
Good morning, welcome. As Rebecca said, Steve Charleston, I'm the CDBG Program Manager, and I also assist a number of subrecipients, local units of governments, and administrators with the practice of and the implementation of those grants issued under Community Development Block Grant and Community Development Block Grant CV, which is the CARES Act. So a very brief intro before we start. The Community Development Block Grant was actually authorized in 1974, and there have been some reauthorizations in the 1990s. And currently, the Council of State Community Development Agencies and others are looking at a reauthorization since the program, in terms of when the act was established, has amended several times. There has not been a reauthorization through Congress. Major resources, as you'll find references as we move through the training modules, we'll be referring to a number of CFRs, which in this case for CDBG falls under 24 CFR Part 570, and actually 0.489 if you want to get into the general regulations as far as administration of the program by the state. And it's always helpful if you do your search that you are seeking the electronic version, because it'll tell you the current date that is. There's also HUD.gov, which is helpful, and there is the HUD Exchange that the state and others count on for what is being current. And as we move through the era of CDBG, the CARES Act, and disaster recovery, there's a number of items that have been issued. So Rebecca, you want to move through that? Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to reference, in the past, a lot of the information would go on the HUD Exchange, and that was the main resources where those could all be found. But currently, with this current administration, our HUD representatives have told us that the HUD.gov will also be starting to be used much more. So I recommend bookmarking both of those items. And if we have time at the end, I'll take you guys to those web pages. Steve, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. In terms of CDBG, there are 3 primary goals that are recorded in the Act, and that's to provide decent housing, and that's carried out through a number of our opportunities, as we call them, that are broken down through the annual action plan, and also to provide a suitable living environment for those persons, and we'll discuss those that are primarily and principally low moderate income, and to expand economic opportunities for individuals. We'd like to give you a chart here that shows the allocation tiers. So when we speak of the funding resource and the source of that, HUD allocates funding. They're the federal agency, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And that program that they deliver to us, the Community Development Block Grant Program. And as a side, our agency also administers the HOME program, the National Housing Trust Fund program, and also the CARES Act and the disaster recovery. So the CDBG is tiered down to the state and also to entitlements. And in Nebraska, when we look at those entitlements, the state is considered to be the non-entitlement service area. That goes to the department. And for the entitlements, there are 4 entitlements now within the state of Nebraska that receive separate allocations. Bellevue, Grand Island, Lincoln, and Omaha. So those activities that take place in those 4 entitlements restrict the state from investing or placing funds within those entitlements for CDBG dollars. And so our program boundaries, as it says there, are the non-entitlement areas. So if you do have questions at any time on whether or not, and someone has asked you, where can that money go? Well, this is the direction that it can take. Rebecca?
And I just want to add that when you are looking for information on the HUD exchange, you need to gravitate to the state program. That is our rule book for our program that we are delivering. So there are some requirements. So anytime HUD allocates funding for the CDBG program, we do have to complete 4 items to ensure we continue receiving funds. So the first one is a consolidated plan. The state of Nebraska chose to do a 5-year consolidated plan. And then within each year of that consolidated plan, we have to do an annual action plan. So we're currently in our 2nd year. I'll go to the next slide and this explains a little bit better. And then we need to complete an analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. And we also need to complete the consolidated annual performance evaluation report. So the annual action consolidated plan tells us our goals for the 5 years, what we're trying to achieve. The annual action plan tells us what actions we're taking to achieve those goals for that 1 program year. And the consolidated annual performance evaluation report tells us how did we do with achieving those goals. So these are items that the state completes on different time periods. So the consolidated plan is about 5 years, along with analysis of impediments. Annual action plan is every year, along with the consolidated annual performance evaluation report. Our current consolidated plan covers the program years 2020 to 2024. So that is July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2025. So we identified 4 goals for the CDBG program. Those are increase availability of affordable housing, enhance public facilities and infrastructure, encourage economic development, and support vital public services. So in order for us to achieve those goals, the Nebraska CDBG program identified 7 different methods of distribution, which we highlight within our annual action plan, which does go out for public comment. So if you do have ideas, questions, feel free to reach out to me or Steve on how we do distribute our funding. We are open to any ideas. So for the program year 2021, we split it into downtown revitalization, economic development, owner-occupied rehabilitation, planning, public works, tourism development, and youth job training. Most of these application cycles for 2021 have closed. We do have 3 cycles that are open continuously throughout the year. So if you do have projects that you're interested in applying for, those include economic development, tourism development, and the youth job training. Feel free to reach out to Steve or me outside of this presentation, and we can take a look at any projects that you're thinking about. So anytime we are contacted by a local unit of government, from a consultant about a potential project to use CDBG funds, we always have to consider 5 items. So we are told about the project, and we need to be able to answer, what is the service area? Who is the recipient? Is the recipient eligible? Is the activity that they want to do with that project, is that an eligible CDBG project? How is this project going to meet the national objective? And who are the beneficiaries of this project? So these are all the questions that we continuously ask ourselves when we are asked about a potential project, or when we are funding a project and evaluating throughout, monitoring, making sure everything is good. So keep this in mind. This is something that you should also be thinking about when you are thinking of projects and wanting to apply for CDBG funds from NDED. Steve, did you have anything else you wanted to add here?
No, that covers, and then we'll elaborate on that as we move forward.
Yes.
And I do want to thank all those participants, because looking at the list, there's 55. So either there's a popularity out there with the program, wanting to know, or you really do like me and Rebecca. Anyway, moving forward on the requirements, which falls back to what Rebecca was explaining, there is a fundability test. And as we move through the training and the webinars, I would encourage you to recognize some of those items that will be found at the end of the webinars, in terms of evaluating how well the presenters presented the material, so you could be successful in achieving the goal of being certified or recertified. So when it comes to one of the tests, it's fundability. So every project, the activity must be eligible under the Housing Community Development Act. And there is some leeway that we have, because the state is allowed to determine what activities are priorities. So when you read through, as Rebecca mentioned, the opportunities listed, you will find not every eligible activity listed in the Act is a priority of the state. All activities must meet a national objective, whether that's under low moderate income benefits, slums and blight, or under urgent need. So we'll talk more about that as we progress. So eligible recipients. Are local units of government exclusively. In other words, the only eligible recipients that are awarded grants are those local units of governments, villages, cities, and counties in the non-entitlement area. Now, there are special policies which allow us, in terms of assisting nonprofits and for-profits, those entities, where they would, on the behalf, in other words, a local unit of government would submit an application on behalf of that, for example, a nonprofit for services, or that for-profit under economic development. So just remember that under the program, local units of government are the only eligible directly to the state, which, if you have questions, please ask us, because there are a number of special entities out there and they're not directly eligible. Okay, Rebecca.
Thanks. Next up, so as we're talking about eligible recipients, they have to be a local unit of government within the non-entitlement area. One item that we do need to check for those eligible recipients for local units of government is their status within the system awards management. So a little background on this. This is a federal regulation. In October 2003, it was decided that all federal contractors need to register in the Central Contractor Registration Database prior to awarding any contract. This was further expanded in 2012 when it merged several other databases together. So we've issued policy guidance on this in Policy Memo 13-02, 14-02, and 18-02. And a lot of this kind of came to fruition, I believe, with Hurricane Katrina and contractors not handling federal funds correctly. And so this is a method to prevent mishandling of federal funds. So before we go into Policy Memo 18-02, I was going to show you guys our sam.gov website. Hopefully I did not sign out. It looks like this. And so we would need to do a search for a local unit of government. I logged out. Everyone does need to create in order to search in here, you do need to create a user account with it. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So we always need to check to make sure that the local unit of government is active and registered and are not debarred from receiving any federal funds. So I do an entity filter here and also I'm going to look for the city of Columbus. They would like, and Columbus is a very popular name, so I'm also going to filter down by the zip code. So we see the city of Columbus here. This tells me how long their registration is good for. It needs to be renewed annually by the city. So this is information that we as a state are looking for. You take a look at everything going on here. Who set this all up, if they are individuals associated with the city. Then we also look at the exclusions here, and we see that there are no active exclusions. So this is great. This is exactly, we would have no issue awarding to the city of Columbus CDBG funds. So next up, I'm going to walk through a couple scenarios with Policy Memo 18-02. This refreshed our guidance regarding on who needed to be actually registered and fill out a registration form within sam.gov, and then versus who you need to check to make sure they're not debarred. So we're going to go through a couple situations right now. Remember, red means they need to be registered and active in SAM. So they need to have an individual at that organization to have an account in SAM and make sure the registration stays active annually. White means you need to do a search in SAM to verify that a federal government entity has not debarred that organization from receiving any federal funds. And then blue indicates an individual, no search is required. So if we are constructing a library, the two entities in this situation that need to be registered and active in SAM are the state of Nebraska, NDED, and the local unit of government. But then that local unit of government needs to do a search in SAM to make sure that anyone that they hire in this situation are not debarred from receiving federal funds. And they don't get a choice in the matter. The government entity would put them in the system on their behalf. They're so kind. So there is that situation. So if you're doing commercial rehab, entities that need to be active and registered in SAM and everything's good would be the state, DED, the local unit of government, and those businesses that are receiving funding for commercial rehab. They need to ensure that they are registered in the system. And then the general administrator, the contractors here, and subcontractors, before you enter into a contract, you would need to make sure that they are not debarred from receiving federal funds. Owner-occupied rehab. Again, it's the local, state and local unit of government that need to have an active registration. And then the local unit of government will need to check to make sure that the entity they are hiring for general administration, housing management, lead-based paint are not debarred from receiving federal funds. So with what happened with Hurricane Katrina, there were several contractors, that organization, their company became debarred, and then the owner created a new company that was no longer debarred. So you do need to do a search for this, and we'll get into this in the procurement chapter on the owner also, just to do your due diligence to make sure that everyone is allowed to be receiving federal funds and they have not been deemed to mishandle federal funds. If you're building a child care center, the state, local unit of government, and the nonprofit daycare would all need to be registered and active in SAM. And then everybody else who would need to make sure that they are not debarred from receiving funds. And then if you are doing a for-profit business, again, it's the state, the local unit of government, and the for-profit business that need to be active, registered, no exclusions in SAM. And then everybody else, we need to make sure that they are not debarred. So a couple resources for SAM is SAM.gov website. It just had a refresh this summer, I believe in June. So they are a learning opportunity for everybody. I'm still learning new things every time I log in and trying to use everything. And also the Nebraska Business Development Center. So if you are working with an entity that needs to be registered in SAM and they're having problems, I would reach out to these representatives to assist with that, because they have additional contacts that would help make the process a little bit smoother. Cool. Steve, do you have anything else you want to add?
Not at this time, Rebecca.
Great.
So we'll move on to the national objective. And as we go through the presentation, you'll probably recognize a number of items later on in terms of the evaluation. So I would encourage you to, if not, be aware of and take notes as we go through. We'll talk about the national objective, which is one of those items when we mentioned fundability. There's national objective and there's eligible activity. So I'd remember that. So in the national objective, it's broken down into 3 tiers as such. There's benefit to low moderate income persons, which has 4 listings. When we get into area benefit, limited clientele, housing, and jobs. And housing itself deals with units, and area and limited and jobs deal with persons when you look at beneficiaries. Slum and blight is keyed to an area basis, a designation, and also available when there is not a designated area on a spot basis for, say, for example, an individual structure maybe, or parcels of property. Urgent need, those are very difficult to meet as a national objective. Critical, it could fall under, for example, DR, disaster recovery more so, and also under the CARES Act. But we have some cases where there may be an urgent need, but we'll talk more about the difficulties of that as we move forward. The national objectives, you'll find those that benefit low moderate income persons, aid in the benefit of elimination of slums and blight. And then when you break down the urgent need. They have to have a particular urgency. There's an 18-month period of calculation where the local unit of government is not able to fund on its own or to obtain other sources of funding to take care of that situation. So those three areas break down. If you need to go further, 24 CFR, as noted, 570.403 identifies that. So let's go into low moderate income. And we bring this up here at this point on, there's a statutory requirement that all states as non-entitlements have to meet. And this ties into our community development plan, which is identified in our annual action plan. So the states have for Nebraska, a 3-year community development plan period, 19, 20, and 21. So in 21, we're in the 3rd year of our community development plan, which is very important because at least 70% of the state's funds expended for that 3-year planning period must meet the benefit test to low moderate income persons. And this ties into how we look at our activities in our opportunities in our annual action plan, whether or not we are allowing that national objective to match up against that opportunity and those activities that are listed. So let's go into a little more detail on the LMI area. Go ahead, Rebecca.
And I just want to let everyone know this is something that the state DED tracks. It's not something the certified administrator needs to be aware of for individual projects, but this explains to you why there are certain times with our method of distribution, why we limit the national objective to only being low to moderate income. Like we did in 2018, we were close to not meeting that 70%. So one of the years we were not able to fund any slum and blight projects. We try to keep this as close as possible, a good eye on this. And so please, when we are determining that method of distribution, we're trying to ensure that we are meeting the statutory requirement of 70%. So if you have questions on this, please let us know. I haven't seen any questions in the Q&A yet. Amber, have you seen any questions?
Not yet.
Okay, cool. Okay, Steve, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. So to tie back to that, so 2022, we're starting new, in other words, the first year of our 3-year planning period as we move forward. So under low moderate income benefit, as we mentioned, there are 4 items. Area benefit, that's within a service area, as was mentioned by Rebecca earlier. And the beneficiaries that are tracked are the persons that benefit. Limited clientele, there's 8 listings that in the Act and in the regulations that has been determined that are considered to meet low moderate income benefit. Not all persons in those, but at least 51% of those on limited clientele. We'll talk more about that. And then housing, households, where those households, those families need to meet the test of benefit to low moderate income based upon income and also looking at the median annual income based upon the county and then structured through data provided by HUD. And then there's job creation and retention, where at least 51% of those persons, those positions filled must benefit low moderate income persons, whether it's retaining, creating, and moving forward. So to meet the national objective under low moderate income area benefit, there's basically 2 ways, and one of those ways is through data that's already provided, which may be American Community Survey, U.S. Census, which now is the American Community Survey, that data. It is possible also that based upon the listing that comes out that a community may be low moderate income now, and then the next time the survey's data is issued, they're not, or they may be now not, and later they may be yes, or they can continue. There's another method where actually there's a survey methodology where the who's ever preparing the application, those working with the community can actually do two types of survey, a census survey or a random sample survey. Okay, Rebecca will talk about that more later in terms of survey methodology. The data on individuals within the survey, that survey area, survey area, the service area, needs to be primarily residential and benefit those residents that are low moderate income in terms of that. Incidental, they're not counted. So if you're saying that those persons that live and are outside that service area also benefit, it has to be the direct beneficiaries within the service area. And the service area, as you design it and put it together, must be the service area that the activities serve. You don't build it based upon the ability to arrive at greater than 51% low moderate income persons within the boundaries of an area. So you direct it based upon the actual activities. Okay, Rebecca. Limited clientele, as we mentioned, they benefit a clientele who are generally presumed by HUD to be principally low moderate income persons, abused children, elderly, 62 plus, battered spouses, homeless, illiterate adults, persons living with AIDS, migrant farm workers, and adults that meet census definition that are severely disabled. And in most cases, this will tie into usually two areas, elderly persons and adults severely disabled. And that ties back into how we look at the ADA, Americans Disability Act, in terms of removing materials and architectural barriers that restrict the mobility of those two classification presumed groups. So if you have questions on how those tie in, we'd be glad to talk to you as you develop an application or consider one. So moving on. So give you some information here in a little more detail about presumed benefit and income eligibility. Usually what we find on income eligibility of 100%, we would find that when that actually deals with in terms of housing. So we're going to benefit directly those families that live within those units, 100% LMI. Family size and income is evident. At least 51% of the client are presumed. So at least 51% have to meet the LMI test. And presumed benefits, we look at that data where they're serving a group of persons in any one of those 8 areas. In some cases, that's based upon statistical data that's provided, or it's based upon records of those that are served by that activity. We find that in terms of opportunities that may be in the area of, for example, tourism development projects, could be in the area of daycare centers and some of those types where you actually are looking at measuring the clientele and the clientele's families in terms of their income. Did you have any comments on this, Rebecca?
I do.
I knew you would.
Just a couple more examples. So we often see the presumed benefit here coming up in senior centers or homeless shelters for those projects that we're funding. So that is automatically assume that seniors are only going to be the ones using the senior center. So then they are the presumed benefit. Income eligibility, 51%. Often we see that with daycares that we have funded in the past. So 51% of the clients that are being served by that daycare have to be low moderate income. And then income eligibility, maybe there is a food bank where they are only going to be assisting folks that are low moderate income. So if you're above the 80% AMI, the average median income for the county within your project location, you would not be eligible. So everyone below 80% would be eligible to participate in that food bank project. So there are 3 ways to qualify under limited clientele, but you need to make sure if you are coming up with a project that would serve limited clientele, feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. Happy to help with that.
Anything else, Rebecca?
That's it for me.
Okay, so as Rebecca mentioned she mentioned a senior center. So any project, make sure that is exclusively for the benefit of those individuals that are presumed to be the beneficiaries. So a community center that includes seniors is a community center and doesn't pass the test in terms of the presumed benefit. So be cautionary in terms of that type of activity that you undertake for presumed benefits. We want to talk about low moderate income housing. The residents from that unit will actually be income qualified as low moderate income, and that's the residents, the family, and those that are living within that residence. So there may be more than one, and so you have to be very careful when you undertake the income eligibility test for owner-occupied rehab. That's usually the primary activity under LMH, and that is in terms of beneficiaries, we count those as units, although the family, those living there, must qualify under the income eligibility test. And then moving on to jobs. Most of our economic development projects that we fund are based upon job creation or retention or allowable, available to, held by or made available to, which is a little more difficult. But there are some very stringent record keeping processes and procedures. So the local unit of government as a subrecipient, which we'll refer to our subrecipients. At one time we referred them as a grantee, now they are referred to as correctly as a subrecipient, and working with a business, the for-profit. So there'll also be an agreement between the subrecipient and the for-profit business. Now the subrecipient holds in place all responsibility for the funds. So as an example, if that for-profit, or in some cases nonprofit, failed to meet the tests of, say, national objective that they were funded under, the subrecipient, the local unit of government, has a responsibility to repay the state when that project does not meet a national objective. There needs to be records kept on job creation, on hires based upon those positions. They put together a hiring plan and identify the positions in terms of those skills and in terms of those education that need to be there, especially if they're looking at first consideration for low moderate income persons. They need to also, if it's job retention, there needs to be a documentation that those jobs there will be lost. And maybe also in cases of some businesses that business without the assistance would lose the job, but would also maybe lose the business itself. So if you look at, there's job creation, there's job retention, and there's making it available to low moderate income persons and those jobs that are held by, in terms of those losses that may take place, that at least 51% of those positions at time of hire will be considered to meet the low moderate income benefit test. And that test is such as when that individual is hired, they self-certify that they are low moderate income in terms of an intake form. Anything you want to add, Rebecca?
We have a couple of folks on here that are brand new, and then we have other folks that are recertifying. So one of the terms that Steve threw out to everyone just now is subrecipient. So For the brand new folks, we said that the local unit of government are the only entities that are eligible to apply for CDBG. If we find that the application is feasible, meets all the requirements, that local unit of government in all of our agreements will now be called a subrecipient. This was a major change that we've done in our manual for the recertifying folks. You'll see that we replaced the word grantee, how we previously called local units of government after we funded their projects. We used to call them grantees. Now they will now be called subrecipients. We did this in part because we were monitored by our Housing and Urban Development representative from the Omaha office, and they wanted us to align better with the 2 CFR 200 piece. So this is a term that we are incorporating. If you guys have any questions on this, on how this relates to older grants, feel free to reach out to us. Again, hopefully that all makes sense. So local unit of government, once we fund the project, they will now become referred to as a subrecipient. Okay. Anything else you want to add to that, Steve?
Yeah, one other addition, as Rebecca said, if you go through our manual and when you receive actual documents for execution and review, you will find that a contract is now called an agreement. So our subrecipients enter into agreements. Prior it was our grantee entered into a contract. So that's another change that took place based upon HUD's review of the state's program. And we'll talk about some other changes that are significant based upon HUD's review of the state's program that deals with 2 CFR 200 subpart D. And that'll be up and coming in another presentation. But thanks, Rebecca, for clearing that. I appreciate that. Okay, moving on. So when we talk about elimination of slums and blight as a national objective, there's an area basis and a spot basis. And the area basis means that that designated area is determined to be slum and blight, and it's a defined area, and the test is within the 24 CFR, but it's also that designation that we'll talk about in more detail about some of that, that it also comes under the Community Development Act. We rely upon that process in place under Nebraska statutes to go through that designation. You can have an area that's designated as blighted, but you have to be cautionary in terms of how you look at that. You may also have to do a study to meet what's required under the Community Development Block Grant Program in terms of determination of slums and blight. So it's on an area basis. There is a 10-year rule, which I'll mention now because it's critical, that there is a redesignation that must take place within 10 years from the designation or the last redesignation of that area as blighted. And then when you do that test, you need to show what types of improvements have been made within that area that's designated as blighted. And that action needs to be official action taken by the local unit government's council board as such. Spot bases, that's specific instances of blight that are not within a area basis. You cannot submit a spot basis that's within a designated area basis. So please do not consider, if you have a structure or a property within an area that's already designated, you want to qualify that on a spot basis. It doesn't work. It needs to be looking at the area basis overall and what that property, buildings, in other words, what you want to undertake. And usually you'll find that in our downtown in terms of what we deal with there in terms of the DTR part of our program, that opportunity. But as we mentioned earlier, sometimes those are limited based upon the CPD as far as the planning year that we're in. Okay.
And there's
Rebecca,
also
go ahead.
So we referenced the federal law here, the 24 CFR, but there's also state law references regarding slum and blight. So that's actually within section 18-2103 of the Nebraska state statutes. And we include those definitions when we are making our method of distribution within our application guidelines available for potential applicants. So just be aware there's an additional layer on this with state law for us.
So if you're new to the program or you haven't worked for a long period of time or understand, it's helpful if you would go into looking at some of the exhibits that deal with national objective that are in our opportunities, especially on the slum and blight, that give you that indication of what must be recorded and what must be provided as supporting documentation. As mentioned, there's a 10-year clause. That wasn't there all the time. It was put in place some years back. The activities must address the contributing conditions to slum and blight, whether those are buildings within that area or infrastructure within that area that's determined to be in a condition of blighted. And remember, it's a description identifying that that place is really blighted. The terminology sometimes has an unfavorable tone to it, but don't take it in that regards. On a spot basis, as mentioned, it has to be outside of a slum and blighted area if there is a designated one. And there are some very specific limitations: acquisition, clearance, relocation, historic preservation, rehab of buildings. So you are limited to what you can do on a spot basis. And then on an area basis, you also want to look at what those limitations are too, because it doesn't mean that you can go in on an area basis or on a spot basis and completely redo or restructure buildings, especially on the interior of those structures. So you'll want to look at what's allowable within those opportunities based upon slum and blight. Rebecca, anything else?
I think that's it.
Urgent need. Not used in Nebraska under our community development block grant program, what we call our annual allocation. It is used in our CARES Act in the CV, and it has been used in some cases in the emergent threat component, which you will not find listed moving forward, but it has been used, but it has to have a serious and immediate threat to health and welfare of the community. It has to be of a nature that's at least 18 months in occurrence, recent. And as we mentioned, the community is unable to finance the activity on its own, which it must demonstrate, and that there are not other funding sources, whether federal, state, or local, or other entities that are available to carry out the activity. And this is an item that HUD has looked at us for several years in the past, and we've not taken this on because of the nature of one recent origin. So if it's been there for a long time, it's not recent. So next, Rebecca.
I just want to add with the 2019 flooding that occurred, we amended our annual action plan to create a new method of distribution called emergent threat, which is what Steve was referencing. And that made funding available to local units of government that may have been impacted by the flood to either meet the national objective for an activity through low moderate income national objective, slum and blight, or urgent need. We did fund in 2020 a few projects that were impacted by the flood with urgent need. Like Steve said, we don't have it within our current 2021 method of distribution, the emergent threat. Right now, we are only authorizing our local units of government to apply for funds. through low moderate income activities or blight activities. In addition to a regular allocation program, we do have the CDBG coronavirus response, which again, kind of an emergency thing going on right now. And so we do have some projects coming in with urgent needs. So if you are going through this training as a certified administrator, if you are hired by a local unit of government that was awarded CDBG dollars to address urgent need, feel free to reach out to us and we can provide technical assistance because it is very rare. We've only done it most recently in 2020 and then a couple 2021 awards. So less than 20 projects out in the state of Nebraska have been funded with urgent need. So please keep that in mind.
National objectives, as we mentioned earlier, the local unit of government enters into an agreement. They're responsible for those activities, and they're responsible that those activities that are designated meet a national objective as approved and awarded by the state. That local unit of government, the subrecipient, has a responsibility from the award process through the closeout process that the activities funded are fundable. In other words, they meet that national objective by the time they arrive at the end for closeout, and that they are, of course, eligible again in terms of eligible activities. So cautionary, if you decided to change up your project as you move through what was awarded, you need to talk to us, your program representative, about the nature of those changes that are taking place. That change may be location, that change may be the use of that, and also the beneficiaries. There is also a 5-year rule on continuation of use after closeout, which is an item we could go into later on in terms of the program. So in terms of the national objective, I encourage you to make sure you understand and have a knowing of those national objectives when it comes to low moderate income, slum and blight, urgent need. And when you look at the illustration that shows the components as they break down, there'll be a need to know that later on. So that's beneficial. Rebecca is going to talk about survey methodology. So you want to move it ahead, Rebecca? Anything else you want to add?
We did have a question come in regarding
we're not answering questions.
Oh, no, we answer all the questions if we know the answers. It's regarding LMJ, so I'm going to flip back a couple slides to get to that. So does a new hire count as LMJ if the job will lift them from LMI status?
Well, I'm not clear what we look at. First of all, there's a platform that business has. In other words, they have X number of jobs already in place. So if they're creating jobs, then they would be new hires. And all the new hires would be looked at in terms of whether they were low moderate income or not low moderate income at the time of hire. And then they would be counted at that time of hire. They would hopefully meet those positions that where they were identified where that business needed to fill. If they are positions where there's retention, there's a period of time where those jobs, when they look at, are taken by. So persons that are leaving and coming back with new positions can be looked at dependent upon those that are taken by. I don't know if that answers the question. I'm not clear on what the question is.
Let's walk through an example. So if a local unit of government collaborates with a for-profit business, at time of application, the for-profit business provides us a baseline of what their current, how many employees they have. And then they also identify additional jobs. For your example, you want to say new hire. They're creating jobs. So they would identify job positions. They would advertise to make those job positions available to low, moderate income folks. So if an individual comes in and applies for that position, you would income qualify that individual prior to being hired for that position. And if it is found that they are low, moderate income, they would count as a low, moderate income individual. So if that job is going to take them out of, instead of, let's say currently they earn $25,000 a year, and the job they applied for and were hired for now allows them to make $50,000, they would no longer be considered low, moderate income. We base it off of the date of hire. So we're using it at that $25,000, what they were making at time of hire item. Hopefully that cleared it up.
So if the question is what point in time do you count based upon their income prior to hire or what their income potentially could be after hired, it's based upon their family income prior to what they would be earning. So it's at the time of hire. Looking back, there is a form and they identify how many persons are in the family and what their income is above or below this amount within the county of residence. So you also have to take into consideration the type of position that those persons would be taking. So it's the time of hire, if that's a question, Rebecca, as you said.
Yeah.
So it's not, if the job pays more and it brings them above qualifying for low, moderate income, that's not the measure. The measure is before they are actually on the payroll. So that's where that counts. So what we're looking at is providing persons that are low, moderate income with opportunities so that they can be in a position to earn better than and to create economic opportunities for that person. So I don't know whoever asked the question, if that answers their question.
It did.
Okay. That was a long answer from both of us, but anyway.
Before I move on to survey methodology, I did want to highlight areas of our webpage. So you can access our webpage by typing in opportunity.nebraska.gov. And then my cheat method is always to type in CDBG and it'll take you directly to our page. So if you don't want to go through the breadcrumbs, otherwise, if you go to our homepage, you can click on community and then there's a couple extra buttons for you to click. So here is our webpage. We provide background information on the Community Development Block Grant, our funding opportunities, which we need to update because I see a couple things out of date. Here are our plans and reports that I mentioned to everyone earlier in the presentation. So I informed all of you guys that we're currently under the 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan. Here is a copy of that. Per HUD regulations, we include our 2020 annual action plan within this document, our first year, so that's why it's included here. So if we want to take a look at that, you can. We have our prior consolidated plan available. All of our current annual action plans are located here. You'll notice that 2020 is missing here. It's because it's folded into our con plan. So if you want to take a look, these all go under public comment period for everything that's going on. And then here's our citizen participation plan for the CDBG program, we are required to have a citizen participation plan, and that layers down to each of our local units of government that we award funds to, each of our subrecipients then consolidated plan, annual performance reports are all saved here. So that is our reports and plans, along with our analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, which is available, which we just redid in 2020. Also on our website, we have these lovely collapsible sections. We just got done talking about national objectives. One item, if you are brand new to the program or you're veteran in the program, I still refer to the Guide to National Objectives and Eligible Activities for State CDBG programs when thinking about new projects that are proposed to us. So I highly recommend you guys take a read through this after the training and learn a little bit more. Benefit low moderate income persons. We do have a breakdown of each of the national objectives here. We said for LMI on area benefit, you would qualify either through an ACS, American Community Survey, 5-year low moderate income summary data, or by conducting an income survey. So I wanted to walk through a little bit of this for the group. So this will take you to the HUD exchange. HUD updates this information and they provide you an Excel document. So if you are wanting to apply for CDBG funds, you could, and you have an LMA project that is eligible, you can take a look at this document to see if your project would meet it through this. So if I had a community center that is serving the entire town of Columbus, Nebraska, I would look up Columbus. So I usually filter down by the state, which is Nebraska, and then I search for Columbus. And then I look for a place. And right now it's showing that they have a low moderate income percentage of 39.77%. That is below 51%. So I would need to conduct, and I disagree with that. Since I disagree with that, I know that there have been several layoffs and businesses have shut down in Columbus. This is all, I'm making this up. I want to update the data. So I want to conduct an income survey. So I'll go into that briefly for folks. So this is kind of the very first kind of determine, okay, this is one flag, I'm below 51% for that situation. So I will go into my income survey presentation now. Okay, so my community center in the city of Columbus, they're below 51%, serving the entire community. So we're going with that example. So income surveys are used to document LMA benefit when, as I just showed you, the ACS data is not applicable. It's not current, or it does not provide enough information regarding income levels in the service area. So maybe the service area is less than 51%, or the service area, maybe my community center is actually only going to be serving the northeast portion of the town of Columbus, which is 24,000, I believe, since the last census. It's only going to serve the north side of town. Then I can't use the ACS data because the people it's serving is only the north people, and the ACS data is telling the entire town information. So that would be one of the instances that would be, I would need to do an income survey. So Steve, do you have any additional examples of why ACS data may not apply? You may have taken a coffee break.
Sorry, no, I had to unmute. I need one. So if anybody wants to run out for a cup of coffee, do not do it now. In terms of why that data wouldn't fit, it depends upon one, if it's for the entire community, and then your project service area is not the entire community. So in terms of ACS data not applying. So if you needed to take other than ACS data, you would then go the route of an income survey, whether that would be census style or random style. Is that what you're looking for, Rebecca?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so it just depends. So don't consider the entire community to be your service area when the activities benefit lesser area than the entire community. So you need to make sure that your service area is primarily residential and that it does have benefit to the persons that it primarily serves. And in some cases, it does not have to be located within the service area that's designated. And if you have that type of an activity that deals with, for example, drainage, that needs to be improved outside of the beneficiary area, but it directly benefits a service area, talk to us in terms of before you actually start looking at a project. My comments.
Thank you. So HUD LMI data, which I just showed you guys all, must be used to the fullest extent feasible. Changes to the area may not be reflected in the most current data. Again, this is based on the 2011-2015 information what I just showed you. It's currently 2021. The service area, target area may not always conform with the census block or tract groups, especially in cases of public improvements, public service, or public facility activities. And then all income surveys must state the reason why you were conducting the survey, what led you to believe this. So for my example with the City of Columbus, I don't believe that percentage is correct because we had so many layoffs from all of these businesses, like half the town shut down. So I disagree with it. I would state that within why when I provide that information to the department. So there are federal CDBG regulations at 24 CFR 570.483B1I that require that the survey be methodologically sound. All steps of the survey must be documented and submitted to the department at time of application. If you want, you can submit it to us earlier than at time of application to see if everything's in order. That's completely acceptable. Income surveys are to be conducted on families, not households. Family is defined as a single person or a group of persons residing together, regardless of actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. There are CPD notices regarding these items. We did include copies of both of the CPD notices issued in relation to the survey methodology. Those are in your manuals. Appendix 1 speaks all on survey information. There are 2 types of surveys to be conducted. Again, this comes back to what is your project, what is the service area, who are your beneficiaries. So if I was in census survey is the service area, has 200 households or fewer, this requires a high response rate. Everybody in that service area needs to complete the survey. Now, if I am doing, the secondary option is the random sample survey, and that is for service areas with more than 200 households, and it's representative of the entire population. So if I was in the city of Columbus, I disagreed, and I have community service, a community center that's serving the entire town of 24,000 people, I would be conducting a random sample survey. But if I was doing a community center in the north side of town, that's my service area is actually going to be less than 200 people, I would do a census for that. Again, if you have questions of what type of survey, kind of break it down, your situation, and send us an email and explain why you're coming to the conclusion of the census versus random or vice versa for the potential project and to qualify under national objective. So the service area is the area that will benefit from the completion of the CDBG project. You can use already identified boundaries, such as natural boundaries, rivers, and or man-made boundaries, streets, railroads. It is up to the local unit of government for them to tell us what the service area is. If you can't define to us what the service area is, that is a big problem, and we question what's going on with this project, because this is the first item that you need to be aware of, because that's going to determine who is benefiting from the project and also who, what type of income survey. So usually you identify the service area, draw it out on the map, then you identify the income survey, and then you conduct an income survey. So this is actually happening probably a year before you submit a CDBG application to the department. We've seen some certified administrators or local units of government doing a much quicker time span, but just there's a lot of planning involved. And I am just giving you guys a very brief overview on conducting income surveys. It is our plan to host another training on that's a little bit more detailed, but it probably won't happen until next year on completely walking through income surveys. Conducting income surveys, you do need to develop a questionnaire survey form. We do have a sample within our appendix 1 for folks to use. You need to determine who will be surveyed. So there is census, which is really easy. It's every resident. Oftentimes we see the utility list used by the local unit of government to get the addresses of everyone. Random sample size, again, often use the utility list, and then you use a random generator. You put numbers next to each address within the service area, and then you use a random generator to determine who you would be surveying. And there are very key rules within the random sample size. Within that and surveys returned, I recommend reading through the guidance in Appendix 1 if you are going down the route of income surveys. Next, you'll need to publicize the survey. You need to make sure that when you are publicizing the survey that you aren't referencing that you don't want to sway the individuals completing the survey on their answers. So if you're saying, complete this income survey so we can get CDBG funds, which will allow us to pay for the street improvements and you don't have to pay anything, that would be swaying them. Please don't do that. It will just be general information. Please make sure that you are aware of all publications regarding the survey. We did have to throw out one of the surveys because they, I believe it was a radio talk show. Someone spoke on it and it referenced everything. So make sure all parties involved with the survey are aware of not swaying the individuals on their answers. You conduct a survey, analyze the results, document your results. again, avoid bias throughout the process, and make sure everyone is aware of it. There are a couple of key terms in here when you are reading into the CPD notices that we reference. There's the margin of error, tells you how many percentage points your results could differ from the real value. And the confidence level tells you how sure you are that your estimates fall within your confidence interval. Confidence interval related to the margin of error, and confidence level tells you how much uncertainty there is within a stat. So there was new guidance that was issued April 1st, 2019 by HUD regarding surveys. So surveys were fairly standard since 2014 with the initial guidance that we received from HUD. This adds another layer. So with the 2019 guidance, you must comply with the margin of error information. So any surveys that happen before April 1st, 2018, we need to make sure that they are in compliance with the margin of error and after. So this tells you how many percentage points your results could differ from the real value. And we do have, sorry, I did not update this. We do have updates within our appendix section of the manual. So we have HUD income limits here, the sample size calculator, margin of error calculator, and exhibits E1 or E2. So let's walk through a little bit of some of these sections here. So when they talk about margin of error, where do you find that? So it's on the same page as where we went for the ACS. It's going to be the document right underneath. We'll open that up quick. Give it a moment. So you can, again, filter down by your state. Here, we'll do Columbus. So we have a margin of error of 3.6. So that means when I'm conducting an income survey, I will need to have same margin of error or less for my survey. So that is something to be aware of. There is that item there. And then we'll open up. And if anyone has questions, see a couple questions come in. Steve, are you unmuted? Okay, not sure if Steve's getting coffee right now, but we did receive a question.
What's the question?
Yeah, if a community has a fire district rather than a fire department, would that be an example of why ACS does not apply?
Well, first of all, we look at the service area, and if the ACS doesn't match, in other words, where the data is collected for the ACS, if that's the local unit of government boundaries, does not match the fire district's service area, which is in most cases taxed, the property owners are taxed. It's not a mutual aid agreement area. And I'm not sure about why they don't have a fire department if they have a fire district. But anyway, so we look at the service area for the fire district, which may be beyond in terms of a rural district that covers also the community and boundaries outside the community. So the ACS data would not match, and then you would need to do an income survey of the area, which would include the community, whatever the fire district service area is. If you're looking at applying for an activity that is for a fire hall, fire station improvements, or equipment that is housed within that facility, such as fire truck, and those apparatuses that need to be, that equipment that matches up with that fire truck. Do you have anything else, Rebecca, you want to add, or I'm find out if that answers the question?
So also with a community has a fire district, if they are part of additional, it depends on where the fire department's housed. So if it's within the community, or if it's outside of the community a bit, you may have to have additional agreements with like a memorandum of understanding with the other communities that use that fire district. So this is very specific question. If you do have a potential project involving a fire department, a recommendation is to reach out to the department, and we'll take a look at how you would qualify for the national objective and activity, and who would be the entity that would be the applicant for it. So hopefully that answers your question.
So Rebecca.
Yeah.
So a rural fire district can be located within the jurisdiction of the local unit of government in terms of the buildings. As Rebecca said, it's the service area that we look at. It's not always where the facility is located that designates the service area. It's the actual area served by that operation, that facility, that use, that service provider.
Cool.
So I would say if the individual or any other individuals have some very specific questions to follow up with us outside of this training module.
And then, Steve, we do have another question. Could a man-made boundary be a city's ward?
Is that a legal question? No, if you're talking about the local unit of governments, they have, for example, their city officials, board members are elected by, as they say, ward, a designated area. What you need to remember is you look at the activity and you look at who it benefits, and then you identify that service area. So in some cases, it may be man-made boundaries, and in some cases, it may be natural boundaries in a combination. So a community can be, for example, have boundaries where the railroad splits a community, or a stream or river, creek or crick, whichever you call it, is a natural boundary. Or you have other types of boundaries, maybe it's commercial industrial development or those types of situations. So I'm not sure I wouldn't look at a ward being a boundary. I wouldn't look at exclusively a census tract within a larger municipality being the boundary. It's possible, but you need to look at the actual activity and the service area. So for example, you can have a major street, Main Street, that runs downtown through the downtown business district that serves the entire community. The improvements for that street may be 4 blocks, but the entire community benefits because it's a major thoroughfare, and it's an arterial and maybe it connects to a highway or whatever the situation may be. But I would encourage you, as others have done recently, is to make those contacts with the person that's the opportunity manager for that opportunity and discuss with us your project. End of discussion for me, unless there's other comments.
No, I don't see any. Hopefully that answered his question.
And you're welcome to follow up, whoever asks these questions, with an email to address, so that we can address those.
Perfect. So I did want to walk you guys through Appendix Section 1 because I gave a very brief overview on income surveys and what they are. So within the Appendix Section 1, we have 4 resources. We have both of the CPD notices available, 19-02 and 14-013. And then we also have a sample form for income surveys and the income survey methodology that walks you through it. So one item that CPD Notice 19-02 references is the margin of error that needs to be used. And then also if you have multiple, if you're building out your service area, it's not the entire community, like the example, maybe it is going into the county level, or it is over, it's not the entire community, but you're part of a larger community and there's multiple census tracts and you're crossing over. This goes into more information on how to define everything. So again, please read through this stuff if this is something that a project is coming into place and it's going to need, an income survey needs to be conducted. So, and oftentimes we see income surveys with our public works opportunity. So 14-013 also provides you kind of the ground definitions of everything that builds upon here, and they're referenced within 19-02. Here's our sample form that is available for folks, and if you can recreate this for everything, it's very simple. It's a letter normally that is sent out to the resident. And then they need to identify their income. So if they're a family of 4, let's say the income limit for the community for a family of 4 is $50,000. They would, and they are a family of 4, they would need to indicate if they are above or below $40,000 for their household income. So, and then we also have demographic information within here. So we did create the step-by-step guide on conducting an income survey. I recommend reading it. Your training is not completed when after attending all 7 webinars. So this is a very large program. It's very detailed. It's been around since 1974 and it's been amended on several different areas. So it's, and we're getting new guidance from HUD every now and then. So again, please read through everything and be continual learners. So hopefully if anyone has additional questions on surveys, usually they're easier to answer when they are project specific on this. So, okay. Steve, anything else you want to add regarding income surveys?
No, except plan early. So if you're looking at an income survey, as Rebecca and I were talking this morning, start that process, not the day you plan on submitting an application, but sometime prior, because it does take community support to undertake an income survey within that community. Anything else, Rebecca?
Yes.
So, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I also want to reference our data webpage on here. So I did show you guys where you can hyperlink directly to the ACS data. We also have information here. We did create a visualization map tool here based off of the data from HUD. In addition, for income surveys, this is the link you would use for program income limits here, and we'll just take a look at that quick. I believe I selected the correct one. You would select the county, which is Platte County. So 80%, that is defined, 80% or lower is considered low to moderate income for the CDBG program. If you're working with other federal programs, they have different definitions. I lowballed it when my example. So you would use these numbers on your template that I referenced in here. So you would identify those numbers off of here. So they would have 45,850, and then the resident would indicate if they were either above or below those items. In addition to, so that's low moderate income on an area basis. We also have, income limits for CDBG program. So it took you directly to the home income limits. The home and CDBG program, their calculation is the exact same, and it's a lot easier to view on this one using the home income limits. They have them for CDBG, but it's this really huge Excel document that is just difficult to read. So we always recommend using this information here, and I'll show that to the group. So if you are, so they have each of the years here. So we'll open one up for the group, and then we'll go to Platte County. So for our other low to moderate income national objective subcategory, so there's limited clientele, there's also low moderate income jobs, housing, those three, you would use this document to determine if the individual / their family is low moderate income. So going to Platte County, if I know my alphabet. So again, low income would, hopefully you guys can all see this on the screen. Platte County here, low income right here. So if you were trying to determine if someone wants to participate in your food bank program, if they are 80% or lower to participate, they would need to be making, in their family of one, they would need to make less than $45,850 to be eligible for the CDBG program. So anything else you want to add to that, Steve?
No.
Okay.
But also, well, I should say also, this is key to when you're looking at jobs too.
Yeah, so if you're using this for limited clientele, housing or jobs, this is the information you would use. Also on the data on the HUD exchange, which I wonder if we have a direct link. There is actually a CPD calculator that they update, and I will find a direct link and get that to everybody after the break. Just don't remember how to get to it because it's been a while. This is really helpful for everyone to use when you're doing limited clientele jobs. It's located right here, CPD income eligibility calculator. You can actually use this for multiple programs. They update it with the information that releases, and they do send out notices. If you haven't already signed up for the HUD Exchange to create a login, I recommend doing so. You can then save your results of your CPD income eligibility calculator for everything. And I think during the program guidelines, we'll walk through this a little bit, that presentation next week for that with LMH. So please keep this in mind, very helpful tool. Great, I will turn it over to you, Steve, for the eligible activities. Oh, we were going to take a break. We'll take a 10-minute break because I know 3 hours is a very long time for a webinar. We'll take a 10-minute break and return at 10:45. So we'll just put everyone on mute. And if you do have questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that everyone enjoyed the 10-minute break and got another cup of coffee. For the next section, we will be discussing. And Steve, I just want to confirm that you are on the phone and we can hear your audio.
I'm not on the phone.
Okay, welcome back.
Thanks.
We did have a couple questions that came in, and I was just going to pull those up. One person asked why we use the 2011 to 2015 number when there are more recent numbers out. And it's been a while since I've looked into this, but I believe the American Community Survey was last conducted during that time. I believe with the 2020 census that occurred, an update will be being provided. But overall, we're dependent on HUD providing us the numbers, and HUD does these calculations for us and provides them to us. So we are following their lead on it. Hopefully, and I'll look into that a little bit deeper and get you official citations after the webinar today. And then we had another question come in, and you might know the answer to this or have a better knowledge of it, Steve, but has DED ever funded or had a community combine a senior center and a daycare with CDBG dollars?
I'm not aware. The only one I recall, we did an adult daycare facility in Kearney many years ago that was linked to the medical facilities there. But if they were looking at, they say a senior center and a daycare?
Correct.
Child development center?
Yes.
Well, if there is that type of a facility in operation, or they wanted to expand a facility, it's not prohibited. It's that you would be looking at that facility needing to meet the national objective on both terms. So if you're looking at a senior center with a daycare and they still need to address the national objective on the beneficiary side for both groups that are being, because you have the seniors that are presumed beneficiaries, and then you have the daycare in terms of those clients and families that would not meet presumed beneficiaries, and in most cases wouldn't qualify as presume based upon the location of that facility within the community. It wouldn't be an easy task.
Yeah, we would have to do some creative thinking on this. It's not a simple yes. So if you do have a community that's looking into that, feel free to reach out to us, and we can dive into it a little bit more of how we could make that potentially work. Yeah, interesting concept. And then we did have a question on what sections of the manual we're kind of going over today. We are covering the portions of Chapter 3, the CDBG National Objectives. We just got done with that. A little bit of Chapter 2 administrative overview. Just a little bit of that. That's something that Chapter 2 is something that we touch upon throughout all 7 webinars. And then also we have been Appendix Section 1 has the LMA information within there for us. So that is what we are covering today, are those chapters. Fortunately, we don't cover it page by page, but if you do have questions, feel free to ask. In person, this training event's a lot easier because questions come in much quicker. So we appreciate any questions you have. But Steve, I'll let you take it away with eligible activities.
Hey, thanks, Rebecca. And based upon the layout of the balance of the webinar today, I am the presenter, with Rebecca providing her knowledgeable insight as we move forward. So if you do have questions, please do place them in the chat as appropriate, and then we'll attempt to answer those as we move through. So we want to talk about eligible activities. We talked about national objectives, which the national objective is one of those fundability items. Now we'll talk about eligible activities, which is the second of that in terms of fundability. So every activity that we fund, must be an eligible activity. So every activity must be eligible according to the Housing and Community Development Act under Section 105. And when you go into the regulatory part in terms of 24 CFR, you will find the national objectives listed. But in order to find out the eligible activities, it's in Section 105A of the Housing and Community Development Act. And there is a general rule. The general rule is any activity that is authorized by housing is not authorized, is ineligible to be assessed. Now, there are some exceptions as we move through that discussion today, which are exceptions because they are in greater detail. There is a HUD matrix code that matches eligible activities to national objectives. And based upon that, there is a handout that indicates what those HUD matrix codes are and what those eligible activities are. And based upon the national objective, how do they apply? As we move forward, as you probably move forward, you will find that in Amplifund and looking at our agreement in the sources and uses, and we direct all of those that activity numbers based upon the HUD matrix code now. So we've moved forward to the HUD matrix code. The codes that we used prior are not the codes that we're using now, unless you actually have a prior grant with a contract that states that, and we can work through that process with you also. Did you have anything on that, Rebecca, in terms of the handout?
Once we get through the eligible activity slides, I'll bring up those handouts you were referencing.
Okay, thank you. I didn't want to leave you out. All right. So there's a number of activities listed that are eligible, and we'll go through these quickly, and then if you have any questions, and then we'll also provide some additional details. Acquisition of real property. Now that can be purchase of real property, that can also deal with permanent easements, temporary easements, and long-term rentals in terms of leases of property. There is the Uniform Relocation Act in terms of federal rules, in terms of how you acquire property. Public facilities improvements on privately owned utilities depends upon the nature of privately owned as we move into that on the property. But public facilities, that breaks down into a large number of types of facilities. Code enforcement. The program does not finance a code enforcement program. So if you're looking at code enforcement, I would encourage you to read up and do a search within the HUD Exchange. There are some very specific notices that deal with code enforcement because that ties specifically into property that is unsafe for the public and identified by that local unit of government that needs to be brought up to code to meet those. Clearance, rehab, reconstruction, and construction of buildings. That's a clear-cut piece that ties differently into different national objectives depending upon how that's addressed in terms of that activity, whether it's the rehab or reconstruction of a community center or of a single family owner occupied unit. Architectural and barrier removal, that one has its limitations because it ties into, in most cases, presumed beneficiaries as you move within that LMC piece. Next. And then there's a number of items: loss of rental income, disposition of real property, which under our program we don't deal with extensively. Public services, we've progressed into the public service activity mainly under the CARES Act. So that's where you'll see where we're working with public services. Payment of non-federal share, that is a fact that CDBG dollars can be used as a match against other federal programs as long as that program allows it to be a match. Relocation, we try to avoid relocation because of a number of rules and regulations that deal with relocation benefits. Planning, that's one of our opportunities that we deal. Program administrative costs at the state and at the subrecipient level is allowable. Nonprofits, which we fund, activities that are carried out. A neighborhood-based development organization, the NDOs, which deal mainly with our revolving loan fund program at the local level with the NDOs. Energy conservation, sometimes efficiency, you'll see that possibly within downtown. Economic development assistance for profits, that can be related within our economic development opportunity, our tourism development opportunity. TA, which the state uses, housing services, which has some limitations, but can be undertaken. Home ownership assistance, which if you're looking at that type, we need to go into greater detail. Lead-based paint, hazard mitigation reduction, you'll find that lead-based paint rules are triggered under owner-occupied rehab, depending upon the amount of CDBG funds invested in that property, and also under the CARES Act. So that's another item. Tornado safe shelters, that was added a few years back. We've funded one facility for that in the past, but it's not easy to do. Next. So we'll get into a little more detail as we talk about eligible activities. Administrative costs, reasonable program administration costs and charges are related to the planning and execution of the CDBG program. So this is the administration of the grant issued. So the subrecipient, in order to complete the agreement for that award, they can, based upon the limitations within the opportunity for the amount that can be put into a budget for administration, can pay for the cost to administer the actual grant. And this is not project delivery costs. This is the overall administration meeting the rules of that actual agreement. Go ahead, Rebecca. So it's program management, coordination, monitoring, reporting, and evaluation. And within the contract executed by the administrator, they will outline in their scope of services what they are actually going to conduct, provide services for, and request reimbursement for when it comes time to payment for the administration of that agreement, the contract award. So next. Staff and related, this is a participation, fair housing, record keeping, compliance, closeout. Others that are specifically related to CFR Part 200 that aren't prohibited. And you must understand that these are items that are directly related to the administration of the grant that is provided to that subrecipient, that local unit of government. And in most cases, this would be laid out in that manner. Staff and related costs, that's an item that we need to make sure that we know what those charges are, and the local government can back those, or the certified administrator, whoever is administering or charged against that, can provide source documentation. So as you're probably aware, as we get into financial management, you'll find that in Amplifund, when there's a draw submitted, a request for payment, there is source documentation that must be submitted with every request for payment. Next. The delivery costs are different in terms of activity delivery costs, allowable costs for implementing and carrying out the activities, specifically for housing rehab, commercial rehab, allowable activities, time, travel, whether it's housing management or construction management. So under the delivery costs, we've developed over the years two items, two, I guess, activities, line items that are covered under your budget for project delivery. And one of that is housing management. And that goes into how you take care of the housing program for owner-occupied rehab in terms of the delivery of that program. And then construction management, and that's a line item or a contract that's executed for taking care of those rules and regulations beyond overall general administration, that in most cases ties into labor standards under Davis-Bacon, if that's triggered, and to making sure that all those rules are followed. Public services, there's lead-based paint training, that's testing, lead-based paint testing. That's usually a separate agreement contract that's executed with limitations on the amount that can be applied when it comes to lead-based paint testing. And that's usually customarily in the owner-occupied rehab. And then there are other delivery costs that may be for architectural engineering. Next. So any questions so far on what was discussed in brief?
Just wanted to remind everyone what we discussed for eligible activities and ineligible activities. This is at the overall federal regulation level. Like we said at the beginning of the presentation, Nebraska further prioritizes certain activities for us to be delivered in the state. So that's what's in the regulations, not what is maybe being delivered out in the state of Nebraska.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Appreciate that. Ineligible activities, as of course there are those activities that we cannot fund, and as Rebecca said, it's based upon the rules. So if that local unit of government has a city office or facility that's for the general purpose of that local unit of government, say the county has their yards with regards to what they contain there for taking care of the county roads, we're not financing improvements to those buildings. So those building structures that are for the general operation of that local unit of government. Now, there are some exceptions in special cases. And if we move on. So in terms of buildings for general conduct of government or the use of that local unit of government, there are those items that we can look at when it comes to removal of architectural barriers and materials that restrict accessibility for elderly and severely disabled adults. And that's in terms of how we look at ADA. And that local unit of government may have a 504 plan that deals with how they address those situations in their community. So if there needs to be, and most commonly we would find those in the area of accommodations facilities, such as, for example, restrooms, ingress and egress into that structure. We have financed elevators in courthouses because it was necessary. There was no way to bring to the level below from the third level down to the first level and provide which we consider not to be reasonable accommodations for those persons that were not able to access stairs. And that's within a building and on the exterior of that building also. So there are means to do that. If you're looking at that type of a project, you need to talk to us to make sure that that does fit with regards to mobility and accessibility elderly. Okay, next. So within the actual act and the rules, we can deliver some public services. One of those that we provide as a priority is fire protection in terms of fire stations and equipment. So that's one item, and that was brought up earlier by an individual that had a question on the fire district in the service area. I would recommend that you talk to us to make sure that that service area is a service area for either the rural, the city, or the combination, whether it's a volunteer or non-volunteer. That's not the concern, but it's actually the fact of what is a service area and what is a need. There are some cases when there are structures that are used for different services, whether it's admin functions or not. So you may have a local unit of government that has a building. Part of it houses the city functions, and part of it is the actual community center. Not the facility for the meetings of the council, board, or county officials, but actually a community facility that is used for such features, functions in that sense. When we do prorate the cost, depends upon the type of improvements that are being undertaken on a square foot basis or on a cost basis, depending upon what's being addressed within that facility, whether it's new or renovation of. Next. Operation and maintenance. When you put together a application, one of the words that you should not include is repair or maintenance. So when you talk about repairs, the program does not repair what needs to have happened over time, where that local unit of government, through their operation and maintenance program, needed to make those repairs to the streets, the water lines, the sewer system, drainage system, or any type of that infrastructure. Mowing grass, filling potholes, those maintenance, repairing sidewalks and such doesn't cut it. In other words, we're not into that business. Staff salaries related to the program, no. We'll talk more about force account later when the actual local unit of government's street improvements are undertaken by their actual employees. New housing construction, the block grant program does not finance new housing. There is some exceptions, but that would deal with the fact if you had a program that was unfortunately triggering relocation, which we don't want to have happen. Next, Rebecca. So in eligible activities, as we addressed, I would highly recommend that you remember this. Buildings for the general conduct of government, repair, maintenance, and operation costs. Those are key items, and you can identify the effort made by the local unit of government in your application to address these issues and what they've done, and that if there's something that needs to be done to improve beyond the actual maintenance of the property. Next. Let's talk about fundability as we move forward. Okay, Rebecca, move forward. We stressed in the beginning fundability. It's a key threshold that determines the eligibility of projects and programs to be funded by CDBG. So we make a fundability determination of every application, looking at the local government in terms of the activities, are they eligible and they meet a national objective. The federal government, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, through their monitoring process and their checklist, when they review our subrecipients and those agreements and what's actually agreed upon to undertake, HUD reviews a fundability test that we perform, the state, and then HUD will determine whether or not that's compliant. So we run that through the, as I mentioned earlier, from the actual application review to the notice of approval to our release of funds and environmental clearance stage, and through the implementation process, compliance review, and when we enter into closeout. So through the entire process, fundability is an issue. And then even after the grant's closed out, there's a 5-year period to make sure that the property and the national objective in terms of a reuse of that, if it does take place, it still has to meet the national objective and eligible activity 5 years after closeout. Next.
So an example of that is if you constructed a senior center with CDBG dollars, and then all of a sudden in year 4, after we close out the project with you, with the subrecipient, you decide that that is going to become a community center. You all of a sudden changed your national objective, and there would be issues with that. And we would need to follow up with the subrecipient regarding that aspect of the use of that building, since it was not maintained for 5 years for the original intent as a senior center. And you wanted the next slide, right, Steve?
Yeah, thanks. So there's statutory and regulatory requirements for meeting the national objective. They must be eligible according to the Act and the regulations. And then the state also identifies, because within those regs, we have the opportunity, the authority to identify what those priority activities are. There, in my history of working with the program, we have not been put in a position where we had a non-priority activity that we undertook. So if you look at the activities that we provide as priorities, in most cases, they are what I would call the common or usual that a local unit of government is looking at to undertake for improvements within that community. And as Rebecca mentioned, we do have and are working on 2022 annual action plan coming up. There's comment periods, so if you're looking and want to comment on an activity that's not a priority within our program, within an opportunity that you don't feel is addressed, you're welcome to comment on that. And you're also welcome to let us know outside of that, but public comment is the key. Okay, next. So as I mentioned, there is a two-step process. And then it's not line dancing or anything like that, but when you look at the two-step process, each activity has to meet a national objective at the time of eligibility, when that application comes in, and then at the time of approval or award. We also must determine that the national objective are the same activities that were originally approved for award. So another key feature as you move through an agreement that has within there the sources and uses, there are amendment processes that take place, procedures. So it is possible to adjust your eligible activities, but we do look at and backtrack to the application review. We look at how that would score within the criterion that's listed in that opportunity. And we would make a determination, well, would that be, say, a applicant that would be funded based upon what they want to change in terms of activities? If it's exclusively changing activities, which means adding or deleting an activity as you move through that process. So you definitely want to talk to us, whoever your program rep or opportunity manager, before you make those adjustments and spend a lot of time on it. So that's a key factor as far as communications. Next. So there are two elements for a project meeting CDBG fundability test. They're the activities eligible, and that eligible activity meets a national objective. And as we stress, when does that happen? From beginning to end. So from the applicant period to the closeout period, if you're successful and there is an approval of your application, where you actually are entered into an agreement, that local unit of government. So the parts I covered today, I would make sure that you retain, maybe not all knowledge within your capacity besides intuitive, but also looking at the layout with regards to the presentation of the webinar, because a number of these items will fold into the evaluation that's conducted when the webinars are completed to move forward to recertify or certify first time under, or maybe if your certification has lapsed, under the Community Development Block Grant Program. There's a number of references and resources. It is time consuming sometimes to look at those references and resources, but I've been involved in the program since 1982, and there isn't a week goes by that I'm not looking at resources and references. And one of the reasons is because they do change. For example, we had significant changes to CFR 200 not long back with a super circular that made some significant changes, and just recently there were changes. And if you recall Rebecca's presentation on System for Awards Management, when that was put in place, there was a different name for it in terms of looking at eligibility. And it's been combined into one System for Awards Management, sam.gov. So I would encourage you to keep track of those changes as you move through the program. SAM applies to all federal awards. It's not inclusive to CDBG. So we will talk about a number of cross-cutting requirements, regulations, when it comes to acquisition, relocation, environmental review, labor standards. When you actually go forward with closeout and you look at a number of items that deal with project review. Rebecca, do we have questions? We still have some time left on the clock.
No questions have been submitted. I do have, I think there's one more slide for this, two more. We'll go over the handouts next. So here's some additional ones. This is the same link that I showed you guys off of our application section on our CDBG webpage. It's underneath National Objectives, the guide. Everything that our program is evaluated by HUD is within this monitoring handbook. We build out our monitoring based off of HUD's monitoring handbook. So that is something to take a look at. We'll go over monitoring at another presentation. But each one of the components we're discussing during these webinars does receive monitoring in some capacity from the department. And then I think the last one is Steve referenced that there was a transition to the 2 CFR Part 200 that occurred in 2015. Before then, procurement and management of financial and federal awards, that was actually in a different location of the CFR. But it now is transitioned, and this actually 2 CFR Part 200 impacts all federal resources. So very key for you to be aware of that. Next, we'll go over the handouts I did provide to everybody. These are within, you should have been able to download these from the share file page. And if you had problems, feel free to reach out to Amber and she can walk you through, or email you directly that information. So this walks you through the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, eligible activities, and just gives you additional information. I did get this from the State Community Development Block Grant Program Guide off of the HUD Exchange. So if you wanted to read the full document, this is just one of the appendix documents I thought would be of interest to everyone on this webinar presentation. But the state of Nebraska goes through this list, and then we determine which activities we wanted to prioritize within our programs and make available. So there is Appendix A. Next up, I'm going over the O2 HUD matrix code. So this is really helpful, and I keep this near me, so I recommend printing this because it's extremely helpful. So we talked today about senior centers here, and if it does not have an N in it, that means you can fund it. So let's go over the column. So this is the HUD code over here. Amber, can you see my cursor when I'm hovering over, or do I need to use annotate?
I can see your cursor.
Okay, good. Okay. The eligible activities, so here's a listing of all the eligible activities, and then these are the national objectives and codes. So here in Nebraska, we use the main codes for our activities. So we use LMA, LMC, LMH, LMJ, Slum and Blight on an area basis, which is SBA, Slum and Blight on a spot basis, and then we also have urgent needs. So these are the main columns that you need to be aware of when you are thinking about projects and maybe potentially applying for CDBG funds, or maybe you are taking over the management of a currently funded CDBG project. This is something for you to be aware of as you are managing that project to make sure it's still meeting that national objective throughout the life of the grant and after that 5-year period. So for example, 03A senior centers, you cannot fund that to meet the national objective of LMA. It's not allowed. You can only fund it through LMC, LMJ, SBA, SDS, and then urgent needs. So this kind of walks you through it. Child care centers, that's another one. You cannot fund it to meet the national objective of LMA. It's not allowed. So this is extremely helpful. Along with this one is the Appendix C, 03. Maybe I can open it. So again, this lists all those national objectives again, all those activities again, but then adds another layer of the national objective and then the accomplishment type. So let's go down to senior centers. So here's senior centers. Again, it's a little bit nicer format, but it's an 8-page document instead of a 2-page document. It can be funded either through LMC, SBA, SBS, urgent need. And if you're funding it through these national objectives, you'll see that then you will be recording on the beneficiaries of people. So if you were meeting the national objective through LMJ, you would need to be creating jobs or retaining jobs at the senior center. Let's see if there's another example. Trying to think. Street improvements is one that we do a lot in public works. So again, here's all of those national objectives, and then it meets the national objective of people. Steve, do you have one that you wanted to talk about or me to highlight? Again, we have one opportunity within our method of distribution called owner-occupied rehabilitation that would fall under 14A, and this one can only meet LMH housing units. For our program, technically, throughout the entire CDBG program, it can meet all these, but within the Nebraska priority system, we designate that it can only meet LMH at this point in time in our program. So along with this, you need to pair it up with our application guidelines that are on our website. Steve, are there any others that you want to highlight?
Well, it depends. The key, if you go back to commercial, I don't know, it was 15 or whatever it was. But I think the key is on some of these, like there's code enforcement, and for the department, for the state in the federal system, IDIS, the state must match up the beneficiary type that's counted with the national objective for that listed activity that's coded. So whether it's 17B as commercial industrial infrastructure development, or 17C for commercial industrial building acquisition construction. If it's an LMJ, we're dealing with jobs. So that's what's counted in terms of beneficiaries, but that's the types. So we're counting those jobs. So it has to match up same way with if we did historic residential preservation. So if you go back up to, I think it's in the threes. Maybe it's, so there is, so street improvements, sidewalks, childcare. You will see some items on here that we don't give as a priority, such as tree planting. But there is a catch-all, and I can't remember, Rebecca, it's 3.
Oh, it's not on here.
Z?
Yeah, it's not on here. This manual that they had out is from about 5 years ago, and HUD updated all the codes and added 03Z, I think 3 years ago. So it is not listed in here. Way to find the one thing missing.
Oh, I wasn't trying to find it. I was just wanted to mention that there is a code on the infrastructure facility side 03Z. So it doesn't fit on any of those other threes. It is a catch-all in a sense, but you have to be careful on what you apply it to.
So again, this is a HUD created document that I thought would be helpful for you guys. Again, it's not further narrowed down for the Nebraska program, but it gives you kind of a nice starter point. If you have questions regarding specific activities of the national objective and the accomplished type that they would be reporting on, feel free to contact a program representative or Steve or myself here at the department. We can walk it through. We can see how we would have to report it to HUD and go through that structure there to provide you guidance.
As Rebecca said, the accomplishment type matching the national objective for that activity is extremely important as you move through the reporting phase semi-annually. So we want to make sure that the accomplishment, the type that's reported is correct as you move through and report. And if it's jobs versus units, buildings, whatever the case may be, facilities, businesses, or usually sometimes businesses and people are confused as they move through the reporting as far as beneficiaries. So you have to make sure that we're actually dealing with those accomplishments types that match national objective and that HUD matrix code for those activities. So if you move to what is planning 20 something?
It should be 20, yeah. We use 20A for planning.
So you'll see 21A is general program administration. So when you're building your source and uses and you're putting your line items together in your budget, as far as the categories, and then below the categories, you have line items, but your categories in Amplifund in the budget, there's a 21A, which is general program administration, and there are caps. So you want to make sure that you do look at the opportunity and have an understanding, because those caps may be different in terms of the maximum amounts and how they're calculated or what they're set at, depending upon the opportunity.
I believe we did have a question from Dennis on what the asterisk means, and I'm going to have to pull up this original document because I don't see it referenced on this handout, so I don't want to direct you incorrectly on what the asterisk means by LMH. I'm going to double check what that means, but I'll pull up the original document where I pulled this from and get that answer to you. And then I did, we have several questions that are coming in, and some of them are just helpful hints. I did want to go to our website for you guys because I know we have some new certified administrators on the call that are going through the training, and so this is all very new. So as you are developing a project, you would come down to our application guidelines section, and I always recommend looking at the prior year application guidelines because normally they're pretty standard between all the years with there's some nuances. Maybe we change some of the priority activities, or maybe we change the thresholds for everything. But we talk about the applicants, the national objectives. A lot of this information is going to be defined within the application. So if you are a new certified administrator and you're starting at ground zero of an application, it's nice because you can figure out the program as you are building the project. However, if you're hired as a certified administrator and you're to work on an already awarded project, always go back to the application. And then you will take a look at the agreement between the state and the local unit of government for further clarification regarding that, and then talk with the program representative. So here so in our presentation today, we talked about eligible activities that are available to within the non-entitlement area. So, eligible activities available within the entire CDBG program. Here in our application, we talk about what are the priorities. So in section 3.02, we give you a listing of all the priority activities that we have defined as a priority. So you also have definitions here of what does this activity mean. So feel free to take a look at this. This is something to build upon your knowledge. The definitions we took directly from how HUD defines these activities. So if you do have questions, we're happy to help. Kind of going through all this. And then trying to think there's other areas that would prove helpful for the group. Then we have funding breakdowns of everything, information about that. And then the applications, again, we have several different opportunities available for this. Here were all the due dates and next and threshold components for applications to be eligible for, and this all applies to every single opportunity. And then we provide additional details on each opportunity available. So that goes through all of the handouts for eligible activities and also our Nebraska program. I did include this one handout on ACS definitions because when I was new to the program and you're given an Excel spreadsheet from HUD, it is so much information. So I thought this might prove helpful of what are those fields and then what is this describing to me, so you had something to relate back. So these are the columns. I highlighted key columns for you guys to be aware of, especially with income surveys here. And then are there any additional questions, Amber? I know you're keeping track of this a little bit better than I am.
The only one, you might have answered it, so I'm sorry if you did. But we had a question if the CARES dollars have different state priorities than the usual federal allocation. And if you answered it again, I apologize.
Yeah, so for the CARES Act dollars, we were instructed by HUD to, in order to get the funding available as quickly as possible, to amend our 2019 annual action plan. So we did amend our 2019 annual action plan, and within that, we identified where the CARES Act funding would be going. So the CARES Act funding went into 3 opportunities. The first one, it was went into our economic development category opportunity to provide resources to for-profit businesses. The second one went into our emergent threat, which is no longer an active opportunity, only available for CARES Act right now. But that is kind of a catch-all. And if you go into, I believe the annual action plan, I can send that out to the group, the application guidelines available for that. Let me pull up the annual action plan. That defines the different activities. So if you go into our annual action plan, and then we included it funding into ED, and this tells you how we would be providing everything, and it tells you breakdown of CV funding here. Then we also created go into emergent threat. We included emergent threat here, and then how everything's going to be scored, and then also the breakdown of funding here, and the eligible activities are located here for a quick guide. We have application guidelines available. I believe you'll need to email me though. Most of our funding has been applied for. There's just a small amount available remaining out of this right now. And then our third bucket of funding came out of the CDBG coronavirus-related emergency payments. So this is rental or mortgage payments to individuals that are 80% or less average median income within, as defined in their county level. So now for the DR program, they have their own annual action plan that they would follow. So I recommend going to that website, which I do not have memorized. That will take you through the long way. And there is a separate webpage for Community Development Block Grant Recovery. And they have guidance here on action plans. Take a look at this and feel free to reach out to the CDBG DR team with specific questions of eligible activities. And this is a different pocket of money. The 7-part webinar training is focused just on our regular CDBG allocation. So I won't be answering a lot of questions on the DR program for this. Any other questions, Amber?
Not at this time.
So Rebecca.
Yes.
One of the answers maybe to that question is public services under the CARES Act, yes. Public services under the allocation that we have looked at in terms of what was laid out in the beginning as far as opportunities, not a priority. So the significant difference is on.
We have one public service activity. It's the job training.
Well, that one, yes, that's a specific opportunity, right?
Yes.
But when you look at the other types that we've funded under the CARES Act, you won't find those replicated into the allocation. So it's based upon the CARES Act in terms of COVID-19, in terms of what the assistance is directed to by the federal government in terms of the CARES Act itself, and then what was addressed in the act for the federal funding agencies such as HUD. So that's in the, as Rebecca said, that's in the amendment, the substantial amendment.
But if you are interested in the CARES Act funding, feel free to reach out to Steve Charleston or myself, and we can get you some answers to any of your questions and connect you to other staff members. The DR program is overseen by Jenny Mason, and she could answer any questions. I believe also on their webpage, they have a specific email address designated DED. You can direct any emails to that. And then the regular allocation, go ahead and send those to Steve if you have questions. So awesome. We did finish up early, so I will, unless Amber, any other questions? Otherwise, we'll end early.
I'm not seeing any.
If you do have additional questions, feel free to email Amber, and she will connect with Steve and I to answer those questions, and we can send you an email back with answers. So otherwise, we look forward to seeing you guys for tomorrow's training. That starts at 9 a.m. You guys have a great day.
And for Thursday's training?
Yes, on Thursday.
Thanks to everyone for participating.
Thank you.